Okay, a little silence and we're on the live stream as well now. Hi everybody, welcome to EdinburghJS. First one of 2023, and I'm really pleased to see so many people out. Maybe you've all made a New Year's resolution to come to meetups or learn something new, I don't know. But I was just thinking how far we've come since this time last year when this building was still under COVID restrictions and we had one Canadian dude turn up who had moved to the city, I think 2 days before, hadn't realized it was an online-only event because of COVID, so was chapping in the door. So we let him in and we had a little live stream thing. So we've come a long way since then, and it's really good to see some regular faces and some new faces. I think last year it was nice to meet people who were maybe people who had been to the meetup years before, and also some new people who'd come to Edinburgh specifically to work in a developer job. And I think it's nice that we can provide maybe a kind of point of entry to the city so that people can get to know it, get to know each other and the scene here. So thank you for turning up. So firstly, a little bit of housekeeping for the way that the rest of the year is going. So the organisers, there's me, Jamie, there's Esteban there in the front row, and Alan, who does the live stream from Product Forge. So we're going to be carrying on for the rest of the year, but we are looking for people to help out. So both Esteban and I have other things going on in family life, I think it's fair to say. So we'll be needing some people to help out during the year. Either that might be helping out on the night, or it might be maybe taking one particular meetup, organising a couple of people to speak at it, and kind of hosting the night. So if you have a particular topic that you're interested in, you know some people that might want to talk on, chat to me, chat to Esteban, and see if you can maybe do a takeover for one night later on in the year. So we'll probably have 9 meetups total this year. We'll have a little break over the summer where we'll have a summer social, and we'll have a winter social at the end of the year. So I think there's obviously quite a lot of spaces to be filled for talks. So if you want to do something talk about something technical, or if you've been here last year and you maybe seen a community intro, one thing that I really like doing is getting someone up here. They can talk for 5 minutes about who they are, how they became a developer, what kind of thing they're working on, who they're working for. Maybe it's a startup or a side project, maybe someone's recruiting someone, whatever it is. I think it's really interesting to hear stories. I think I've been at a lot of tech meetups in the past. They've been geeks just talking about geek things. And I think the refreshing thing about JavaScript is it's, even though it can be complicated, it can also be quite simple to pick up and get started with. So we can really welcome people who are just starting out in their JavaScript journey, just learning how to kind of put their ideas in the world, or wanting a new job, maybe wanting a change of career, and help them see the paths that are available to them. And there's been quite a diversity of people that have come through and spoken about themselves. So if you think, hey, I could do that, I would love to welcome you up here to talk at some point this year. So please just come and speak to me after, or I'll put some little cards out on the table out there if you want to write down your details and just leave it on the table, and I will follow up with you over the next few weeks. So to get into it, we've got 2 talks tonight. One is from me, because I couldn't find someone else that wasn't Chris, it being January, Christmas, end of the year. So I'm going to do a little talk about the things that aren't code. I've been having a lot of conversations online about this. So I thought I'd do a little 10-minute thing that we can then maybe do some discussions about later. And then Chris is going to be talking about kind of VR development using JavaScript and mobiles and stuff. So I'll get into that later. So I have been talking to a lot of people about kind of remote work and what it means to be a developer kind of over the next few years. There's been a lot of moves. Companies are now saying, you can work from wherever, you don't need to come into the office, maybe you come into the office 1 day a week or whatever. And, they're doing that maybe at cut costs, but I think that has a negative impact on junior developers. I think it's okay for maybe people who are decision makers in companies. I've worked remotely for probably about 12 years, but I do I come to this, I run this because I need to meet other developers. I think remote work means that if you're not seeing all the work that goes on that isn't just the end product, isn't just the code base, then you're missing out on a lot of learning about how to become an efficient developer, someone who knows how to make trade-offs and to work well. So I think there's a lot of things that aren't just the end of the code base. So I think there's a few things that I want to discuss tonight. I'd be really interested to hear kind of what people have found in their experience of either learning or trying to teach others, trying to mentor others within their organizations. So that kind of covers maybe the ways of thinking about code. So there's a lot of thinking that goes on behind code that you don't necessarily see from the end product. Iterating towards a solution. So if all you're seeing is the final bit of code, you maybe don't know how senior developers or other members of your team got there, and the tools that we use. So I thought I'd put up a few things, just sort of ideas, discussion points I think are interesting to talk about, both from the perspective of junior developers, who are maybe things that you can do and things that you should look out for, but also senior developers, so things that you can do to help people on their kind of learning journey. So first one is the ways of thinking. So you can see here on the left, I've got things that juniors should be thinking about. On the right, senior devs. So if you're just looking at the end code, you're coming into an organization, so here's the code base, maybe more senior developers on your team are putting in pull requests and you see those go in and you look at the code. You don't know why particular solutions have been developed. You don't know maybe what other considerations there were, other potential solutions, because there's not always one right solution to any particular problem. There might be many ways of doing things. Some things are come down to particular ways of thinking of developers, and as a junior developer, you might look at the code base and say, this is the only way of doing it. This is the way that my senior dev is doing it, so this is the way I must always do it. But you don't know that they didn't consider solution A and B first that might be more appropriate for other particular problems. There might be ways of thinking for a particular framework or language. Now, I think this applies. I work in Node.js and React, so I'll be using examples from React. But there are things that are Reacty that sometimes people coming into the code base don't get. So they engineer a solution. They've worked on different frameworks. They come in and they do something that works, but it isn't quite in harmony with the other ways of doing things in the code base. An example of this is I previously worked on a project and we were refactoring some React code, and one of the guys that I worked with said, we've got these buttons, there's a row of buttons that are on quite a lot of different pages. We want component reuse. I'm going to refactor this to make it really easy to use. And what he did is that he took something that he made something that generated buttons from a configuration object. So on each page, you'd create this object, and you'd put in your functions, attach the functions to it that would set state or whatever. You'd attach labels, colors, and so on. So you'd end up with this configuration object, and you'd add this configuration object to the array of buttons that would be produced in the page. Then you'd hand it over to a templating thing that would then produce the buttons. And I looked at this and I was like, okay, this works. Like, you can write that object. It is kind of clear, it's not difficult to work out what the field label does or onClick does, but it just seemed over-engineered to me. So my feedback there was, look at the design system. We've got about 6 or 7 variants of buttons now. We've got like an export button, a share button, a view button, a kind of pause, on hold button here. I was like, let's just make 6 buttons. And then we can just pass in the onClick handler. It works the same as an HTML. It will conceptually work the same as an HTML button. We can spit all 6 buttons out into a test. We don't need to remember any complicated configuration. And we can just read down export button, share button. So then it became much clearer, and it seemed like a much more Reacty way of doing things. And I think if what you're doing is you're putting in pull requests and your code is accepted, because actually it works. And sometimes senior dev might not have time to give feedback and say, actually there's a slightly better, more Reacty way of doing things. You might end up thinking, okay, well that is the way that I need to do things. You don't get that feedback that there is a more appropriate way. So I think as a junior developer, you need to ask, what's the elegant way of doing things in this context? What would the senior dev do? So that means talking with the senior devs about decisions, not just post-implementation, but pre-implementation. It's okay when you're picking up a ticket to have a call and say, how would you do this? What's like a nice way of doing it? What feels like a right way? And you can discuss a few things. Design decision documents. I've started putting these just in code whenever I come up with something that requires a little bit more thought. I mean, they aren't for every line of code, but I generally just put a docs folder, design decisions, slap a date on the file, title it something appropriate, and just record a few thoughts of ways of things I've tried, solutions that I've rejected, as well as the one that we went for. PR description is the obvious one. And the other one that I found really useful is when I do a pull request now, if I'm trying to communicate to the rest of the team, I don't just show them how the product works, but I also go through some of the code. I'm like, cool, I've written a function that does this. I've made a few components that does this. Here's the way that I've tested it. I was kind of thinking that actually the tests aren't complete because I haven't had time to do that. Here's what I've skimped on. Here's what I would do again if I was doing this from scratch, but I've spent a day in it, so I don't want to continue with it. And those kind of code demo videos are really helpful. I use a tool called Loom. It takes 2 minutes to do and can be really good to kind of create a library of that knowledge for junior devs to work with. And I think senior devs, don't be afraid to kind of give that feedback. Sometimes it feels a bit awkward if something works, being like, oh, there's actually a better way of doing it. But in the long run, people will thank you for it because they will become better developers, as long as you're kind about it. So that then leads us on to the next point about iterating towards a solution. So if all you're seeing is the final code, you don't know how people got there, you don't know how people work. I think if you're just looking at tutorials, and I know this from people who are self-taught, who turn up to EdinburghJS, it's quite easy to look at the tutorial and be like, okay, this is the way that developers work. But people producing tutorials, they already know what they're going to build. They have almost certainly, to make a good video, have already built the tool and are copying and pasting from a file that is on their other monitor, or speeding the video up or chopping bits out, and not necessarily giving you the kind of flavor of how developers actually work. So I think for junior developers, it's okay to prototype small parts of the system and get feedback before you have your final deliverable. And I think for senior developers, you probably have a responsibility to kind of break up the deliverables into smaller chunks. Like, hey, make the interface, but don't worry about making it work. Or can you just make the functions library and do some tests for that? And then we can just brainstorm, is that actually going to work for what we need? Is it too tricky? Is it too big a thing? If you're showing your code to junior developers, by the same token, depending on what the practice is at your company, but I find it useful to break up commits and sort of say, this is the bit that I refactored. This is the bit that if I'm refactoring something, I tend to sort of extract some functionality. So I have a commit, extract the functionality, move it into a separate file. Make sure if you're moving files around that you're retaining the commit history for that. So you move, you then check in before you make an edit so that people can look back and kind of assess what it is you've done. And there's nice tools out there, plugins for editors that can give you that kind of history, and you can see when big changes are made and you can understand how people work. So that's, don't review the code only at the PR complete stage, do intermediate things. Don't worry about throwing away work. So as a senior dev, be okay with telling people, hey, you might have worked on this for an hour or two, but we're going to throw that away because we've learned something. And make it okay to do that. And also, as a junior developer, realize that someone telling you to throw away your code because you've learned something is not necessarily a criticism of your code. It's like a natural part of the process. And I know that quite a lot of code bases could do with quite a lot of throwing away some code and not, it's the sunk cost. I've already worked on this, so I must make this particular thing work. Another thing that I added to this there is pair programming. There could be an entire talk on styles of pair programming. I'm not a pair programming expert, but I have sat down, video shared my screen, and video shared someone else's screen. And that's a really nice way of working, because that leads on to the next thing, which is the tools that we use. So there's, I think, some different categories of this. There's the language and framework themselves. So as a React developer, I was working with a guy recently working on a, he wasn't full-time on the web, he was part of a different part of the project, but he sort of dabbled in the web and kind of worked on it a little bit. And I said, oh, just pop open the tools and let's inspect that component. So he went to the element inspector. I was like, oh, no, the React component, I want to see the state. And he didn't have the React dev tools installed. And I was like, he's never seen someone work with the React dev tools, so he doesn't know that that's an incredibly useful thing to have in your browser. The same, say with, if you're working in Redux or anything like that, anything that you might want to just jump in and inspect the state in a nice way or log out the state, with colors rather than, your regular logging thing. There are going to be tools specific to whatever framework or language to make it easier to work with. And I think that you can miss it if you don't watch people program. The same with editor tools. I've been sitting programming with someone. Now, this is the thing, when you're pair programming, often if I am working with someone who's more junior, I tend to let them do the typing because, if they're typing, they're kind of understanding, we can get shared language and I can see if they're not keeping up, because if they're not keeping up, the code isn't being written. But sometimes it's useful for me to do the typing, so then they can see how I navigate the code. I was working with someone and I did some multi-line editing, and they're like, what are you doing? Like, how did you just do those 100 lines all at the same time? I was like, oh, you just, and I couldn't remember the keyboard shortcut. I had to physically do it and look, because once you kind of get that kind of fluency with your editor, it becomes second nature. But how would someone know that that's even possible if they're a junior developer? If they're just starting out, or maybe they've been working for a year, they're working remotely, they've never seen someone edit all the lines at the time, they just see the end code. They never see the plugins that you have. I've got some plugins that put error messages. As soon as I do something that static analysis, a linter can say that's wrong, you're using this in a functional component, or this variable isn't used anymore. I've got a plugin that says that on the line that it occurs and turns everything red. That's a useful thing that I find, but people wouldn't notice that if they're running my code in their machine. They'd only notice that if they can see me typing the code into my machine. So I think I found it very useful. Some projects have like sample configurations, like default editor configs, recommended plugins. I think it's reasonable if you're working in a project where you're onboarding people to have something like that and to maintain it and to talk about it as a team. Maybe not like enforce it, but say, hey, these are the things that we find useful. These are the things that make us better programmers. Because a better programmer isn't someone who necessarily just knows more about the programming language or is just a problem solver, but also someone who can use their tools like, someone crafting something, someone who's got that kind of ease. I think I've done a previous talk on like mise en place and kitchen and chefs, who've got all the ingredients in the right place. There's something to that that just makes developing easier. So if you found a new tool, make sure you announce it to your team. Be like, hey guys, I found this amazing thing. It has sped up stuff for me this week. I did that last week when I started using GitHub Copilot. I was like, been writing tests by hand like a sucker for years, whereas now this is coming in, and it can fill out quite a lot of this standard stuff for me. And I had a discussion with other developers on my team. Hey, why don't you install it? How are you using it? Because even if you're a senior dev, junior devs might be more at the cutting edge of stuff and might be able to give you feedback too. So that was basically the thoughts that I've had out of the conversations I've been having online about how senior devs can take on the responsibility for making sure we're training and giving the hand up to the next set of devs who are going to have maybe a more difficult learning environment over the next few years with the kind of rise of remote work. So I'm interested in what you think. If you've got any points you want to make, we can do a quick 5-minute question answers. But also, once the talks are done, we can do it outside over beer and pizza. So does anyone have any comments or questions for like this up at the back?
Hello. Well, I think one thing to consider is it's not always, which a lot of people are still forgetting, again, it's not always you need to join a company for learning all the skills you're speaking about. Sometimes you can do a peer-to-peer project or even do open source or doing something like that to learn all these skills. I found one of the things you said during the speech is basically about working remote and how difficult it is. I know because I have been many years being freelance and doing my business and stuff. The thing is, it's true, it's very hard and you're missing a lot of that and you need a lot doing more networking like we are doing now here. Yeah. But the thing, what I'm finding lately is a lot of people are promoting the idea of going to office for learning this, and I think there is a lot of interest in terms of business and the tech industry to send people to work to an office for learn these skills. And the reality is many times, depending on the work culture of the company, many times you go there as a junior developer, you work as a junior developer, and many times even the senior kind of speak with you. Is they don't have time because they're high demanded job and the business are focusing a lot of work to them. So I don't know if it's really working in an office the best thing to learn. I do believe, by my experience working open source or stuff, nowadays it's easier to get some people in your same level or even level higher or level lower and do a peer-to-peer group or a peer-to-peer project or something like that. It's just a comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. If anyone is interested in like peer-to-peer learning stuff like that, chat to me, tweet at us, and I will try and connect people. Is there any more questions or comments? Down the front here. Patrick.
Oh, thank you.
This is for the live stream, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. It's weird not hearing myself.
Yeah.
I agree. So I sort of moved into programming sort of seriously over lockdown, and found that, yeah, obviously there are definite benefits from being in person in, like with your peers and colleagues and everything so that you can work on the same stuff. But what's really interesting is that I found that out of all of the sort of things that you were sort of suggesting in your talk, the only one that I think really doesn't work remotely is pair programming. Mm-hmm. Whereas everything else, like if everything's geared up in the right way, you can probably do it as effectively remotely and not.
Yeah.
And it's strange because, yeah, like I found that in the company that I've been at, like when we were remote, we had all of those things, but actually pairing really helps. And pairing remotely is always a problem.
It's annoying.
And yeah, it's frustrating for everyone involved, and then VS Code breaks. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, do you think that if that was to be fixed, would you still have the same impression as to whether remote and not remote work was bad?
Yeah, I think, I'm a big fan of remote work. Like by default, it's what I do. I love it. But I think that I guess my concern is that I've seen people not learn as fast as they would. And I think companies can shortchange junior developers. I was seeing some tweets saying, why would developers ever go back to the office? Nobody I speak to wants to go back to the office. I'm like, that's because you only speak to senior devs. And I just worry that, yeah, there is something that's not quite right yet, and you need to be diligent about doing these other practices. As I say, I'm not an expert in pair programming to the extent that it's usually a screen share that I do rather than proper pair programming. And if anybody knows about pair programming and has experienced it and wants to do a talk on it, I would love to hear some stuff about that. So maybe you volunteer to help coordinate that.
Yay.
Yeah. Cool. And got it back there. Yep. Or in fact, or Adriana. Adriana or the guy. You choose, Esteban.
Okay. Yeah.
So about pair programming, just try tuple. It's like awesome. We started trying it since the beginning of the year, and we just can't stop pairing. It's really just there's no difference if you are offline or online with tuple. Just everyone can type in the editor, and just I don't know.
So we need to know what you're using and how you're doing it. So, yeah.
No, I think everything's possible right now with pair programming included. Yeah.
Cool.
Hello.
Hello.
There is one thing which I was thinking about regarding that, maybe not so much towards seniors, but more towards juniors, so people who are pairing with medium-level developers or like higher. From my experience, and I have friends who are studying computer science, I had internships which been fully remote because of COVID and all of that. I realized one thing which is very important, especially for people coming in the industry, is that you need to be incredibly good at talking and communicating. And this is one thing which lots of people seems to forget, that like, no matter how skilled is your senior and how helpful he is, he will not know what you don't know if you will not tell him. You need to say, I hate CSS, and they will drop you like full architecture of, or like articles, and they're like, me too, but I read this, I check that, there is this framework, this is how you can do this. And I feel like lots of people don't have that, or is kind of afraid to ask questions, but like, Socrates, I think it was Socrates who said that, like, I know that I know nothing. So like, it's very important to be like, I'm kind of stupid, or I don't know that. Can you please help me? And like, nobody is judging you. And if somebody does, well, they are not nice people, not you. So I think that's kind of which also lots of people need to understand when they get, especially with paired programming as well. You need to know if person with who you program is better than you, and you need to be brave enough to ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you need to ask, can I code this? And you will explain me, because I don't understand. Like, that's kind of from me.
Cool. I think that's a really important point. So.
Yes. No, actually, I really appreciate what you said in the speech, and I've been a developer for just 1 year now, so totally junior. And I have to say, especially at the beginning, being fully remote from the start, there were so many times where I felt lost, and I was like, okay, am I supposed to know this or not? And I think it's already hard to ask questions in person, but when you're online, it adds like another layer. You know, like, because your colleague is literally like miles away. There's no way. And I think, like, as somebody who has started and is fully remote, I would definitely love going to an office if I had the chance.
Cool. Well, if you want to pair program or like peer network with people, I think at some point this year, we're going to try and set up a little kind of way for developers who are here for the meetup to ping each other messages, you know, help, I've got this problem, struggling at work, need to, does anyone know how to fix, you know, X, Y, Z? So just keep an eye on Twitter, and like hopefully we'll be able to make something, or maybe like have co-working sessions or whatever during the year. Cool. At that point, we'll save the rest of the discussion for afterwards, but now I'm going to hand over to Chris. Chris, we discussed this earlier, as an Inverkeithing or Fife-based developer who works mainly with VR, which I think is quite an interesting topic. It's not necessarily something that you think of when you think of JavaScript, so I was really keen to bring Chris in and have him talk to us, do a little demo of some of the stuff he's been working on. So we were just going to do a quick switch over of laptops. I'm with you in just a second. Right. Cool. Right. Yep, that's all good.
That's what you want.
That was my one, right?
I'll start with this demo. Oh, yeah, I'll start with it. I'll start with this, and then I'll go into the presentations process.
Cool. Chris, go over, everybody.
Console.log hello world, I guess. Yeah, so I'm Chris Godber. I've just got a company I've set up called Alien Rabbit. This is a virtual gallery experience we created with Play Canvas and JavaScript. Play Canvas, has anyone heard of Play Canvas actually before? Yeah, someone over there. Play Canvas is it's like a WebGL sort of JavaScript-based game engine. I've been involved in working in it for about, I don't know, 15 years or something, I guess, on and off. Started off just as and basically the idea of this whole thing is like, yeah, it's just a virtual gallery. So it runs in the browser, and obviously this is just like on the Alien Rabbit website, so we can, you know, you can go on there. It runs in the web. It doesn't really work on mobile yet. That's quite difficult, but yeah, I just figured I'd start there. So let me get onto the actual. I'll talk a little bit more about myself, a background, and all that. Where's the? Go on. There we go. Sorry, I'm just really nervous. Yeah.
Browser, okay.
Try to get to your slides now.
I'm just waiting for that. how do I close this again? I have to go off there and, sorry, I just need to, go on, there we go. There we go. There, sorry. Right, so just get onto the slides, there we go. So, click on slideshow, there we go. So, it's me, it's my name. This talk is called Tips, Tricks and Trapdoors. So it's going to be a talk talking about obviously some of my experience in the industry, some of the sort of, also just talk about some of the negatives as well from the industry that I've had, or just in general, just like, I don't know, things you should try and avoid with when you're developing in general, to be honest. And then trapdoors as well. So a little bit about me. So I'm a computer science graduate from the Manchester Metropolitan University. I got what's commonly known as a drinker's degree, which is a third class degree. But I don't really think it matters that much, to be honest. If you've got passion for coding, you'll do it. Doesn't matter, really. I'm a developer, but I also have an interest in poetry. I'm a writer. I've got some books here, which I can sell if anyone's interested. I'm a painter, so I'm in actual painting, so I paint pictures. I'm also an essayist. I'm probably sounding very pretentious now, but that is basically who I am. Not pretentious, but just do a lot of stuff. I consider failure to be something you just have to get used to. Everybody fails. There's no avoiding failure. That will happen. Being a developer is basically breaking things a lot until you fix them and it works perfectly and you're just like, yes. I have a history of mental illness, so I take benzos and Abilify for that. I think it's probably a pretty important thing to talk about. I won't talk about it too much, but basically I have experience of bipolar disorder, and I've also had epileptic seizures in the past. Again, it's not really a problem unless it becomes a problem when you're working, I suppose. So yeah, so everybody is affected by mental health. Everybody has experience of burnout or depression or anxiety or any number of conditions. That's just a fact of life. Everyone's going to be touched by that at some point in their life. And yeah, just a little bit about my personal religious beliefs. So I consider myself a pantheist. Basically just means that I believe in nature. Nature is God. That's basically my belief system. I almost studied philosophy. So before I went to study computing, I was due to go and study philosophy instead. I've still got an interest in that, so I like a lot of the German pessimism in general. So Chiron, a Romanian pessimist, Camus, the French existentialist, and Nietzsche. I just like reading them just as an escape, to be honest. Continental philosophy. I'm not really that interested in postmodern philosophy. It's very hard to read. The Deleuze Guattari and all that jazz. Anyway. So, dev work. So, I do a lot of different things basically, wear a lot of different hats as it were. So, I've been an indie game developer for about 6 years, I suppose. I build and play, I suppose, I have to play test them. I build indie games which are released on itch.io. Also Google Play Store, my name on there is just Dr. Noir. I can probably show that after I got through the slides bit basically. So I saw a video a while ago, I can't remember where it was, what channel it was on, but basically it was talking about, basically development's going to split into like two different major camps, like pretty much now where we are now. So there's going to be people who build the tools for platforms, and there's going to be the platforms themselves. And I think that's still pretty much, especially in the WebXR industry, that's still sort of, I think, where it's at. So I've started to basically trying to create open source tools and also templates for developers. So I have my own YouTube channel. It's just called Dr. Noir, and I've been involved in that process for about 3 years of building that channel, giving tutorials away for free, essentially, and just experimenting. I think like you're talking about as well, like just experiment and put it out there and that sort of thing, basically. So yeah, and I just do contracting and dev work. So I've been doing that for the last 2 years. just some stuff about me. So hobbies and interests, I'm big into metal and classical music, basically. So Miss Sugar are my favourite metal band. Reading, philosophy, fiction, comics, classic literature, science fiction. I have a bit of interest in Russian literature, as I was living in Russia for 2 years. I was teaching English at an English camp called Recolata. So that was with my partner for 3 years, Yulia. Writing, so I, again, write and publish physical and audio books of fiction under Reading Environment Limited. That's a company I've co-founded with Naomi Valley, who's an artist in London. So this is just basically, I find I am most happy in general as a person when I'm given complete freedom to explore ideas and concepts. So let me be honest about this actually. So like, this does mean that I can, as a developer, sometimes I can suffer from a certain inability to multitask actually. So other people have told me this actually as well, so it's not just me being egotistical. I am a bit of a polymath essentially. So my entire approach as a developer is sort of creative development. So like I said, like as you can probably tell, like I've got a lot of interest in a lot of different areas. So yeah, just like that can mean that sometimes as a developer I can lose track a bit and, you know, spaghetti. I've got a longer form video where I talk about how tech and art sort of can relate to each other. It's called The Artist Engineer. I was talking in London a while ago. So just have a little exercise actually to see if anybody knows who these people are. So these are just some of my programmer heroes basically. Does anyone know who the person on the left is? Yeah, Ada Lovelace, first computer programmer technically. She's a mathematician, daughter of Byron. I hope everyone knows who the person in the middle is. Turing, yeah. So he cracked the Enigma code. He was basically the foundation of modern computer science, famous for the Turing test. And then who we got on the right? Aaron Swartz. So Aaron Swartz is sadly not with us anymore. It was actually one of the most devastating moments of my life as a developer when I found out that Aaron Swartz, what happened to Aaron Swartz. Yeah, it was tragic. He's like basically the key architect in Reddit and pretty much a advocate for an open web, which is, I think, a very important question still now at this point in time. Yeah, so just a generally like a really innovative developer and one of the modern greats, I think, to be honest. Does anyone know the penguin on the left? Yeah, Linus Torvalds. So he's one of the sort of actually, I need to find out more about Linus. Actually, I've been watching a few of his talks, but obviously, like I'm more engaged in Linux at the minute. But yeah, then the guy on the right is a fictional character. Actually, it's from has anyone seen the $1 Billion Code? It's worth watching. It's on Netflix. This is a character, a fictional character and he's in this film. It's a 3-part series called the $1 Billion Code. It's a really good series, actually. I recommend everybody watch it now. Go onto Netflix when you get back and just watch it because it's so amazing. It's in German, but it's probably the best ever film I've seen on just programming a bit, but then pushing an edge of sort of. It's one of the best series I've ever seen on experiencing burnout. Basically, it's like, and Yuri Muller. I sort of. Like I said, I've experienced burnout myself, and Yuri Muller is a character I've like deeply sort of identified with during the series. Yeah, and also if you want inspiration actually for the sort of VR and WebXR work, perfect model for that basically. I guess everybody knows the guy on the left and the guy on the right. Yep, Guilfoyle, Dinesh from Silicon Valley. And then I like this character from Bandersnatch. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but it's sort of like a choose your own adventure interactive story, but on Netflix. Colin's a sort of crazy game developer, basically. Yeah, okay. So, and then Neo, of course, from The Matrix. I mean, it's a classic, of course. And Trinity, I guess, he's a hacker and programmer as well. And then I just put that on the same twice for some reason, because I forgot. So this is just like literally different places I worked. So the last 2 jobs I was doing was at a company called Blipper, also at iCandy. Alchemy Immersive in November, I did quite a lot of work there. They're a great company. I did a Green in Green Street, which you can find actually, greeningreenstreet.com. That's a WebXR experience. You basically go into a virtual, it's AR, so, and then this street map sort of like unfolds like this, and then you just sort of like click and it's like a guided journey experience basically. Worked for a long time in 2 jobs, associate senior developer for Desleon, a cybersecurity startup based in London. I worked for Sticky Pixels as a front-end engineer from January 2020 to May 2021. That was all while I was partly in London, partly in Moscow. I worked at my first junior dev role, proper one, was Pixel Inspiration, quite a good company in Altrincham. More Solutions as systems developer 2016, just at Stockport. I worked for children's charities, one of my main proper like good job that I liked. That was web support officer, so that was very like helping people directly. It was a mixture of like technical support and all sorts really. And then yeah, from 2010 that's when I started just doing like freelance web dev stuff. Basically just went to the Dole office and I was like, I'm making a website for a mate. They're like, yeah, you have to be self-employed then. So I was like, okay. And that was the story, that was that really. This is a little bit of a video now. I don't know how well you'll be able to hear it, but it doesn't matter too much. This is just like a video of a bunch of work from fairly recent, but yeah, it just gives you a good sort of impression of some of the work, I suppose. I don't know if the sound's on. I think Not sure where that music's coming from, sorry. Where is that coming from? Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I forgot there's like there's video streaming, so it would have just loaded. Yeah, sorry about that. There's too many tabs open, as they say. Okay, so carry on. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, I mean, this is just A-Frame's been around for a while. It's easy to get the grips of in terms of like web for building in VR. So in the last year and a half, I've sort of just been developing open source tools for using it, open source components basically. So this is just a sort of conception of how this feeds into, generally speaking, like WebXR in general, the development of WebXR as a platform, metaverse, all this sort of thing, Web 3.0. So we've got components, make them open source, blah, blah, blah. And then those are the key technologies, I think. Obviously, these are quite old technologies in some senses, but they are the fundamental still building blocks of the web. I think HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript and TypeScript, obviously. I tend to be, I'm not like a purist in terms of like just developing with the core languages. Obviously, I've used Node, I've used React, I've used Redux. Redux drives me insane, but it is, you know, it has its use, and yeah, but. Okay, so that's enough about me. I think I've talked about myself enough, to be honest. So I'm just going to demonstrate A-Frame doing something. So this like demo I did for Geometry Audio, spinning Atom in AR. You can, if you've got phones, laptop, whatever, you can feel free to visit that link. It's like literally just a 3D model that rotates around the camera. In this case, well, just assume I'm a camera for a second, it just rotates around like that. I'll show the code. It's very simple. This is purely just using HTML and a bunch of CDM references, so it's nothing complicated. I built it in about, well, I don't know, for 30 minutes. Let's go. Can everyone see that all right, by the way, in terms of the code? Or might I have to zoom in a bit? There we go. Okay, so that's probably better. There we go. So, is that all right? Yeah, cool. So I guess everybody knows how HTML works, of course, but you just got like a bunch of CDNs, external CDNs there for minified A-frame, A-frame extras, which is quite nice. You get a load of extra sort of add-on bits that you can use for A-frame there. An A-frame AR, which is the AR script. This is, I've added the stats in because this is, so this attribute here, stats, I've just added that so I can get sort of like, if I was like testing it out, like obviously I made this pretty fast. Embedded is just means it's embedded. ArJS, the debug, and so it's quite, the thing I like about A-frame, to be honest, is that it's basically just like writing HTML essentially, except you're also, using the power of JavaScript as well, so there's extensibility and everything. VR mode, UI, enabled false. So basically that's just like, A-scene is just, that's like the container for all this code here. The A assets is just whatever assets you're going to be loading in. So in this example, I've got a GLB model core, which is just like a 3D model I designed really quickly. Music as well, and then just preload on there just to preload it. A entity, so yeah, A-frame basically works with an entity system. So I've got an attribute there, camera, look controls, which is defined already in A-frame, and then position 0, 0, 0, which means it's just positioned bang in the middle of the scene essentially. So doing anything to WebXR, you have to think spatially and visually. So all of it, you have to, it's sort of like cross-disciplinary because you need to understand a little bit of physics, you need to understand a little bit of design, you need to understand, it's essentially cross-disciplinary, which is what I like about WebXR, to be honest. Because it's, I'm someone who sort of, to be honest, I just like breaking the rules a lot. And if you're like one of those programmers who is sort of obsessed with trying crazy things, like WebXR is a really good thing to get into, to be honest. So yeah, this has got an animation attribute on it, and then just set the property to 0 on the x-axis, 360 on the y. So if, say, assume that I'm the camera again, it will just, once the model loads in, it will rotate around this way. And then set to loop to true, and then just the duration of that loop. And then, what's this bit again? Just trying to remember my own code. It's been a while since I looked at this. Entity position, and okay, scale 18. That's the scaling of the model. Animation mix is just there. That is a. Oh, where's that from again? That's from. Can't remember. Anyway, geometry is just a circle. Just loads in a circle. Yeah, and then if you're going to load this up on your phone, like you can sort of see just a basic sort of magical 3D sphere, sort of like rotating around you, basically. Then just some lights added here, and a entity light, and then close that tag. Pardon me. And close the body, obviously. Close the HTML. So that's all like referencing external JavaScript. So I could probably show. I don't know how long. How long have I got? Actually, I've got like.
How long do you need?
Because I can go, I'll go on to the next bit actually, and then I'll.
Are you connected to this? Can we see the demo of that?
The which one?
As in the physical that camera.
You'd have to load it on the phone if to do it, because it doesn't really work on. I can show you it on the screen, but it doesn't. I mean, it'll show the webcam, but it'll. Yeah. I could try it. We could do it if you want, actually. So I'll go back. So if I.
Do you have your phone?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, we could do that actually. Oh, that's fine.
Sorry.
I could.
This worked last time. Okay, sorry. I'll tell you what, if you want to see the demo,
yeah.
Chris after.
So it does that, but it will. I don't know if it'll load actually, but the Wi-Fi connection won't be. Yeah. So. Okay, so. This is just like a little bit of an overview on some current stuff I'm working on. This is a very ambitious thing. I'm just doing it just to try it out, basically, because I've been interested in more in sort of game engine programming. I watched a really good talk with the infamous John Carmack on Lex Friedman podcast. Just talking about game engine design. So I'm trying to build like a sort of game engine and templating system for building VR experiences with A-Frame, just because, why not? Just try and learn about that, I guess. And then Room Creator is a block-based map editor and room builder component, which is again built with A-Frame. So it's a component system, sort of like, essentially, a sort of basic Minecraft, essentially. So it's block-based, so sort of like Lego building, but in VR, essentially. And I've got quite far with that. That's random art generator. I've got this obsession of, in the last 2 years, I've developed an obsession with generative art, generative 3D, generating basically 3D content in the browser. I've taken this quite far, probably too far with Solar Gold Rush, where I tried to build a generative space game, but with A-Frame and functional programming paradigm. So Solar Gold Rush is this crazy idea I had, which is way too complicated, but it does sort of work, of building a generative solar system game. A classic thing that I think all game developers have tried to do. I'm going to build a Elite in JavaScript, but it does sort of work. I'm currently working on City of the Damned. It's a science fiction game built with Twine. Yeah, and then I did RandGen, which basically is a procedural generation component. So that essentially just generates, you can generate either random OBJ models. So it's essentially, the primary purpose of that component library is just random distribution. So, and then parameters within that distribution. So, yeah. Okay, so this is just a little bit about my company. It's just Alien Rabbit. So we're just starting out really like a sort of a mixture of a traditional book publisher with like, you know, trying to build up these libraries, trying to do software, trying to do game dev as well. So it's sort of a mixture of, it's a publishing house essentially. So it's a big dream I've had for a long time is to make my own games, but then do it in a team. At the minute though, I'm just working on my own. Like I set up the company with Naomi Valley, who's an artist down in London, but obviously, like I'm up here, she's down there, so, and she's not really a programmer, she's more an artist really. So yeah, we're good to, if anyone's interested in contributing, just like pay per pull request, so I'll just create minor and major update feature lists. And then, yeah, feel free to contribute. It'll be good to get some contributions from people. And then, yeah, I'll just do a code review, test it, make sure everything works, and if it does, then we'll pay you, basically. Okay, so that's like the presentation bit done. If there is, I don't know what time we're on, actually.
Cool. Well, what I was going to say is, you've got a VR headset.
I do have a VR headset.
Obviously, you can put everybody on at the same time.
Yeah.
So if anybody's got any questions for Chris and like want some demos of like what you can do in VR, then what I suggest is we get a few more beers and then maybe you can demo to individual people some of the stuff, and then maybe go through like some of the code people are interested in particular projects.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Chris about like his career path? Because I think it's like you could get quite a lot of people who do websites and web apps, and I think it's quite interesting sort of seeing like this other kind of random crazy stuff that doesn't kind of fit into that thing. So does anybody have any questions for? Or do you just want to see the demos? Esteban, your question.
Yeah, I saw some. Do you use web components there? Because I saw some tags that the browser has no idea what they do, right? So I don't know much about web components. I've heard of them, but yeah, I guess you give some instructions to the browser to what to do with them, how to render things inside them. I think I missed, or I was trying to figure out that part. I guess the library does it for you.
Well, I mean, A-Frame is similar to a lot of JavaScript ecosystems in the sense that a lot of what you are going to be creating has been done already. So, yeah, like, usually you just, I mean, pro tip for doing JavaScript a lot, there's no point always redesigning the wheel if you want to do something, obviously. So, like, that's part of the reason why with the component libraries I'm trying to do something new, because, you know, like, yeah, basically, I guess, if that makes sense.
I've got a question. If somebody wanted to start out, you've got a thing, is it on itch?
Yeah, it's
Is that a good place to start out if you want to start building little games or little kind of experiences in VR? Where would you suggest?
Yeah, the itch.io is a great, it's an indie game space really. It's quite hard to make money on there, but for starting out, it's a good place to start. Obviously, Steam is the main distribution, you know, software for games. Yeah.
Yes, actually, I have a question. So you mentioned you are building game engine in JavaScript. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is it going to be 3D?
It is 3D, yeah.
How is that working? Because I met some people who try to build their engine in JavaScript with 3D, and usually it crashes if you try to build some like a big game. So how do you go about that?
I can quickly show the code for that if that's all right, I suppose. I've got it up, I think. Actually, I'll show the room create component first because that's sort of more tidier version of the same sort of principles, I suppose. So we go to, this is all just like, this is all a compacted sort of, let me just look closer as well, and let's actually look at code. So just registering the component, blah, 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 blah. And I use functional-based approach, so I just try and make functions that feed back into functions, basically, essentially.
Do you use any libraries, or how do you code?
This is depends on A-frame itself, but no, I just write it all myself, basically. So but well, I should say though, the first part of the code that I got was inspired by a dev post. I can't remember who the guy was, so it is like an iteration of an existing way that somebody did something. Okay, so it's just a for loop basically that you get the, and it works on X, Y positioning, and it just basically, it's always really hard to explain, especially when I haven't seen it for so long, but essentially, let me just, So we've got a load of variables here, constant let, so I tend to, I'm quite anal when it comes to constant let, so constant, obviously, you know, constant variable, and then let can be reassigned, so with A-frame, you always have, in the component generation, you have to develop a schema, so imagine if you've got this component, you've got it there, and then you want to give it these are the attributes that you can feed to that component, basically. So there's just a ton of options. So there's a lot of, you've got, like colors, textures, you can give it different textures, then what data you want to load in, and then just basically async function to load some data, which is here. It's just another function here, and then it to wait this, and then it calls the create. So basically, it's what's the word for it again? It's sort of, it's the word recursive maybe. It just basically goes down, 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 down like that. I guess it's sort of imperative programming in a way. It's sort of a mix of imperative and functional, I suppose.
Last question, I promise. So would you say that like writing a game engine in JavaScript is easier than C++, or would you say that it would be better to just start with C++?
I mean, in all honesty, it'd be better to, if you want to work in the game dev industry, to do C++, because that's what's most widely used. The only reason I did this is just to see if it could be done, to be honest. Like, but yeah, most obviously game studios use C++. Only reason I'm really developing these libraries and these games is just to see if it can be done, I suppose. Just see how far I can push it, I suppose. So
I actually ask that mostly because I know with C++ you have lots of flexibility and you can write quite interesting physical functions.
Do you write C++?
I used to, sadly. And that's why I was kind of curious, because JavaScript seems to be much more intuitive. And well, programming-wise seems to be faster, not, of course, compiling times. So that's why I was kind of curious. Is it like better to understand the concept, like because with C++?
I mean, it's faster, I suppose, with JavaScript, right? I suppose, because you can just run it in a browser straight away. I know, like I said, I'm no C++ developer. I've never really touched that language at all. But for people starting out, I think it's easier, obviously. C++ long term is a far superior language, obviously, but JavaScript's good because you can just get it up and running. So cool.
Thank you.
Cool. Awesome. On that note, if you want to see a demo, come up afterwards, and you can check out the headset and so on, and Chris can take you through some of the stuff. He's also got some books. If you would like to talk about what you do next time, please do talk to me, otherwise you'll be hearing from me again, and there's only so much I can do that without going crazy. So please just come and chat to me afterwards if you want to do a talk. And thank you very much, Chris. Yeah. Cool. Please do grab a beer, and now we're off. No longer live, so you can swear. So.